the California Supreme Court upheld a ballot measure, Prop 66, that was approved by a wide majority of Californians to speed up the process of the death penalty in the state of California. It was there was a qualification attached to it to walk us through what all this means. It's a pleasure to welcome back to the show the president of the L.A. Association of Deputy District Attorneys, Michele Hanisee. Michele, welcome back. How are you?
I'm great. Good morning to you and your listeners.
Thank you for coming on with us. And this is a victory for we the people.
This is a huge victory for California voters. This is the best hope we've had in a decade to enforce these judgments.
Now, the qualification is that the ballot measure calls for a 5-year period for this to happen, for death penalty sentences to be carried out. But the courts said that was advisory rather than mandatory, and I'm not actually sure how they came to that conclusion because the language of the bill certainly seemed to be pretty specific.
Well, the funny thing is the opponents of 66 are claiming that is a victory, but it really wasn't a loss for supporters of 66. It was a big win. That's how the supporters of 66 argued that section had to be legally interpreted. You can't have an absolute hard and fast rule that inures to the detriment of the accused. There always has to be a wiggle room for special circumstances, and that's what the court basically decided. The opponents of 66 wanted that section thrown out altogether and asked the court to throw out the entire initiative. So this is the interpretation that supporters argued was legally appropriate. So even this interpretation within the decision was a win for us.
Now, when would this start to be applied?
This decision says the initiative will become active when the decision becomes final, which is normally within 30 days. There's a couple other things that need to happen. The Attorney General needs to get the stay in the federal lawsuit lifted, and the Department of Corrections needs to finalize the execution protocol that they have been working on actively. The good news is that if any of those state agencies fail to perform, any victim or prosecutor can sue to make them do what they're supposed to do.
We're talking with Michele Hanisee, who is the president of the L.A. Association of Deputy District Attorneys. Their website is LAADDA, LAADDA.com. There hasn't been a lot of good news on the law enforcement front when it comes to the law between AB 109 and Props 47 and 57. This is a clear victory. And as we've discussed, Michele, the 2016 election was a weird one. Because the voters of California approved Prop 57. Now, granted, they were lied to, but they approved it nonetheless. And in the same ballot, they approved 66 to speed up the death penalty. So on the one hand, we're letting criminals out and declassifying entire categories of crime as infractions or misdemeanors instead of felonies. And on the other hand, we want to clear up the incredible backlog of people who have been sentenced to death in the state and yet outlived their victims' families for the most part.
I don't see it as inconsistent. One, the voters were very, very clearly lied to about 57. But if you go on the premise that 57 did what it said it was going to do, which is apply only to nonviolent offenders, I think what it shows is that the voters of this state have some perspective about crime and punishment and really want to focus our resources on the most heinous murderers and then not waste resources incarcerating low-level offenders and hopefully getting them to rehabilitation instead.
So now, how many people are currently on death row in California?
Approximately 750.
750, wow. And do we know who's the record holder for the longest stretch on death row?
Oh, goodness. Hard to say with certainty, but I believe that a gentleman named Tequan Cox is one of the people longest on death row. He might not be the record holder, but he's one. His crime was committed in 1985.
All right, so we're going on to 32 years. Boy.
Yeah.
And what's the old cliche? Justice delayed is justice denied. You pity the family of his victims who have had to endure 3 decades plus of him getting 3 hots in a cot while their loved one lies forgotten in a grave.
Oh, he doesn't have 3 hots in a cot. He has designer sunglasses and tennis shoes. That's what I've heard from people who've been on death row to watch him. Thankfully, the family members of his victims are still alive and well. Thankfully, one of them, former NFL star Kermit Alexander, was the signatory, the signer, the proponent of Proposition 66. And I spoke to the family yesterday, and they're thrilled with the court's decision.
If we get back into the execution game, does he go first?
That's an interesting question, because there are about 21 inmates who are all eligible to be executed right now. They've all exhausted their appeals, and there's really no rule about who goes first. Is the person whose crime was earliest, whose conviction was earliest, where the appeals were finished earliest, their age, and there's no set rule. So that's an interesting question. But there are 3 inmates who were all already scheduled for execution at some point and got last-minute stays. So that was Michael Morales, Cooper, and I can't remember the name of the other one. But they were in the hopper once already. They were walking down the green mile, if you will. So it may be that they are next. But that's a decision that the district attorneys are going to have to make in collaboration.
Michele, with this issue resolved because of the power of the ballot process and the courts, next up has to be some kind of adjudication, some kind of repair on the damage being done by 47 and 57. What steps are available to the people to do something to undo the damage that's been done?
Well, the same steps that were taken here. Our legislature has refused to address these problems, and it falls upon the voters to do so. And that's why the ballot initiative exists in California, so the voters can take up legal arms, so to speak, and make their own changes in the law. And I think, honestly, that that's what it's going to take in this instance to repair some of the damage that we've seen in the last couple of years, is for the voters to write their own laws.
Now, that's expensive process, and it's a long-haul process to get the signatures collected, et cetera. Is anybody even, I know there's rumblings of people doing it, but is there anybody actively doing it?
It would be premature to discuss that, since it, let's just say, is a politically touchy subject.
Okay, fair enough. That sentence is freighted with drama. But something has to be done, because we can't, what we've been doing makes no sense whatsoever.
No, and the public is going to start finding out, and I think has been finding out, exactly who's being released under Proposition 57, and it is certainly not the nonviolent offenders they were told it was going to be.
Well, it's a false economy.
700, yeah, there are going to be like 700 felons released in Los Angeles County alone.
And as I mentioned, it's a false economy, because, you know, we might address prison overcrowding, but then what we're going to end up doing is the vast preponderance of these people, tragically, but the recidivism rates are what they are, they commit new crimes, which means new victims. You have all of that pain and suffering, and then you've got the expense of investigations and rearrests and retrials and the whole legal process all over again. So all of this came about because we did not have enough prison space for our exploding population of inmates. And nobody likes to spend money on this, because, you know, it's to sort of steal from Eisenhower. For every dollar we spend on bullets and tanks, that's a dollar we're not spending on butter and textbooks. But the bottom line is, we have to protect ourselves against people who are too dangerous to walk the streets. And there has to be consequences, but we didn't build and we did not allocate appropriate space for a state of 34 million people. And we still have to address that problem. Otherwise, we're going to run right back into the same situation.
Well, that's exactly right. Saying we have to fix prison overcrowding doesn't automatically default to we have to release all the dangerous felons from prison. That's not the right answer. And there's a cost that you sort of glossed over but failed to highlight. And what's the murder of one innocent person worth compared to the cost of incarcerating dangerous criminals? Right,
exactly. I mean, to me, it's immoral. And this is where, I mean, I hate to bring it back onto us, because, again, what we're talking about is our 2 ballot measures that were marketed on lies. But we have failed ourselves A, by not sniffing out the lie, because there were certainly plenty of people, yourself included, that were warning that these ballot measures were no good. And we have failed to vote and to demand the construction of prison space adequate to house the population of criminals that we have. And we got to do that.
We failed to demand the government we deserve. And when people don't demand the government they want, they get something else.
Well, let's at least today enjoy this this victory, because it's been a long time since we've had one. So thanks, Michele, for coming on and talking to us about it. Thanks for the work you do. And again, the website is LAADDA.com. That's the Los Angeles Association of Deputy District Attorneys.
Thank you.